The door was ajar. I could hear laughter from inside, my wife's voice mixed with her sister's. I'd come home early to surprise her, apartment keys in hand, promotion letter in my jacket pocket. 3 years of work had finally paid off. Director. A corner office. A company apartment that meant we could finally save for a house. I pushed the door open quietly, ready to celebrate. Completely useless in bed, my wife was saying. Like, genuinely pathetic. I don't know how I've lasted this long pretending to enjoy it. Her sister laughed. Why do you stay? The money. Obviously. He's stable. Boring but stable. Once I get pregnant, I'll have everything I need. He'll be so thrilled to be a father that he won't even notice I'm sleeping with someone else. I froze in the doorway. My name is Michael. I'm 36. And in that moment, I understood that the man who'd walked through that door wasn't the same man standing in it anymore. My wife appeared in the hallway, still laughing, and stopped dead when she saw me. Her face went white. Michael, But I was already walking past her toward the bedroom, my hand steady even as my world tilted sideways. The promotion letter felt heavy in my pocket. The apartment keys felt like lead. She'd been planning this. Planning to trap me with a child. Planning to use me as a financial anchor while she built a life with someone else. I turned back and looked at her with eyes she didn't recognize. Tell me everything, I said quietly. Starting with who he is. And that's when she understood. I wasn't the man she thought she'd married. I was something far more dangerous. His name was David. A personal trainer at her gym. She'd been seeing him for 8 months, longer than she'd been pretending to love me. She confessed everything in a rush, thinking honesty might save her. It wouldn't. I listened without expression. The affair. The plan to get pregnant. The timeline she'd mapped out. The way she'd been researching child support laws, calculating how much money she could extract from me even after the inevitable divorce. I was a means to an end. A wallet with a heartbeat. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the guest room and made a list. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I could take from her. Her job. She worked in a family business and her family didn't know about David. Her reputation. Social media was a useful tool for the right information. Her security. The one thing she valued more than anything. By morning I had a plan. I called her parents and asked them to meet me for coffee. They arrived confused, concerned. I showed them everything. The messages between my wife and David, the dating apps on her phone, the screenshots of her telling her sister she'd been faking orgasms for years. Her mother's face crumbled. Why are you showing us this? Her father asked. Because, I said calmly, your daughter is about to try to trap me with a child. And I thought you should know what kind of person she really is before she does the same thing to someone else. I left before they could respond. By afternoon, my wife was calling me frantically. Her parents had frozen her out of the family business. Cut off her access to accounts. Asked her to leave the house until she got her life together. She was panicking. But I was just getting started. David didn't know what was coming either. I hired someone to photograph him with my wife. Not just the affair, that was their business. But the moments where he was texting his actual girlfriend, the woman he'd been dating before my wife decided to add him to her collection of lies. His girlfriend received an anonymous package containing everything. Photos. Screenshots. Dates. Times. The full documentary of his infidelity. She left him within days. I watched my wife fall apart as David ghosted her completely. No explanation. No goodbye. Just silence. He'd gotten what he wanted from her and moved on, exactly the way she'd planned to do to me. The irony was almost poetic. Meanwhile, I'd started another project. My wife worked in social media marketing. Very good at it, actually. Which meant she had access to her clients' accounts. I discovered discrepancies in her expense reports, nothing illegal but enough to raise questions. I anonymously reported it to her company's compliance department. An investigation was launched. She came home pale and shaking. They're auditing everything. They think I've been stealing. Have you? I asked. No, but. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said calmly. But we both knew the investigation would destroy her career regardless of the outcome. The accusation alone was enough. Future employers would see the flag. References would be tainted. She'd built her entire identity on being successful, on being admired. I was systematically dismantling both. By week 3 she'd lost her job. Her family had cut her off. David had moved on. And she was sitting in our apartment, the apartment I now owned outright, with nothing but the wreckage of her own choices. She finally asked me the question I'd been waiting for. What do you want from me? And I smiled because I finally had her full attention. I want you to understand, I said, what it feels like to have everything taken away. She stared at me with eyes that had finally stopped calculating. Fear had replaced the manipulation. I'd already consulted with a divorce lawyer. The apartment was in my name, purchased with my signing bonus before we married. The savings were in accounts she couldn't touch. The car was registered to me. Everything we'd built together, I'd built alone. She had nothing. Please, she said. I made a mistake. I was confused. You weren't confused, I interrupted. You were deliberate. You planned to trap me. You planned to use a child as leverage. You planned to destroy my life while building yours on top of my money. She flinched at each word, but they were all true. I showed her the divorce papers. Clean. Surgical. No spousal support. No assets. Just the dissolution of everything we'd promised each other. Sign these and you can keep the clothes in your closet and whatever dignity you have left. She signed without reading them. By the end of the week, she'd moved into a studio apartment in a neighborhood we'd once driven through and laughed about. Too poor, too rough, too far from the life we'd imagined. Now it was all she could afford on unemployment. I received a call from her sister. You've destroyed her, she said. No, I replied. She destroyed herself. I just made sure she had to live with the consequences. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I sat in my apartment, the one the company had given me as part of my director's package, and felt absolutely nothing. The revenge was complete. But so was I. 3 weeks into her new life, my wife attempted suicide. She took pills. Called 911 before they took effect. Survived with her stomach pumped and a psychiatric hold that lasted 72 hours. I found out from her sister, who called me screaming that it was my fault. That I'd pushed her too far. That I was a monster. Maybe she was right. I visited her in the psychiatric hospital. She looked smaller in the hospital gown, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with weight loss and everything to do with understanding that she'd destroyed herself more thoroughly than I ever could. I'm sorry, she whispered when she saw me. I didn't respond. Just sat across from her in that sterile room and realized something that made my chest tight. Destroying her had required me to become someone I didn't recognize. Someone capable of watching another person disintegrate and calling it justice. She'd betrayed me. That was true. But I'd responded with a precision that suggested premeditation, calculation, cruelty. I'd weaponized her vulnerabilities. I'd turned her family against her. I'd orchestrated the collapse of her career. I'd done it all with the cold satisfaction of someone executing a plan. When had I become that person? What happens now? She asked from the hospital bed. I don't know, I said honestly. And I didn't. Because the revenge had consumed so much of my energy that I'd forgotten to build anything new. I had the promotion. I had the apartment. I had the satisfaction of watching her suffer. But I was alone. And that was a kind of prison too. She was released from the hospital on a Thursday with a prescription for antidepressants and a mandatory therapy schedule. I'd hired a lawyer to adjust the divorce settlement. Not out of kindness, I wasn't capable of that anymore. But out of something else. Recognition maybe. Understanding that absolute victory came at a cost I hadn't anticipated paying. She got a small monthly stipend. Not enough to live comfortably, but enough to survive. Enough to rebuild if she wanted to. She didn't ask for it. Her sister called to tell me she'd refused at first, then accepted when she realized she had no other options. I started going to therapy myself. My therapist asked me questions about why I needed to destroy her so completely. Why revenge had felt more important than healing. Why I'd chosen to become a weapon instead of moving forward. I didn't have good answers. David had moved on, new girlfriend, new city, no consequences for his role in the destruction. That was the part that haunted me most. I destroyed my wife while he'd simply walked away. Justice, it turned out, wasn't blind. It was selective. It fell hardest on the people who were already vulnerable. One afternoon, I saw my wife at a coffee shop. She was thinner now, worn. She was working as a barista, a massive fall from her previous position. She was rebuilding slowly from nothing. When she saw me, she didn't look away. Just met my eyes with a sadness that felt like an accusation. I realized then that I'd won the war but lost the person I was fighting to protect. The man who walked into that apartment eager to share good news was gone. In his place was someone colder. Someone capable of watching another person suffer and feeling satisfied. That was the real cost of revenge. And I was finally starting to understand it. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my wife graduated from a community college program in nursing. I found out through her sister, who sent me a photo. My wife in a cap and gown, smiling, actually smiling, for the first time since I'd destroyed her life. She was rebuilding. Not quickly, not easily, but deliberately. Meanwhile, I was stagnating. The director position felt hollow. The apartment felt cold. The promotion that had felt so important that day I came home early now seemed like a consolation prize for a life I'd sacrificed in pursuit of revenge. I'd systematically dismantled her career, her family relationships, her financial security, her mental health. I'd done it all with precision and patience. And for what? So I could feel like I'd won? Winning had left me completely alone. I started volunteering at a community center, not out of redemption but out of desperate need to feel like I was building something instead of destroying it. I taught financial literacy classes to people rebuilding their lives. People like my ex-wife. She never came to my classes. But I saw her sometimes at the community center, studying in the library, preparing for her nursing exams. One evening we ended up at the same coffee station. "Hello, Michael," she said quietly. "Hi," I managed. "I'm working night shifts at the hospital," she continued. "Starting next month. It's not much, but it's honest work." I nodded, unable to speak. "I don't hate you," she said finally. "I think I should, but I don't. I just feel sad for what we both became because of what I did." She left before I could respond. And I realized that her forgiveness, or lack of it, didn't matter anymore. I needed to forgive myself. And that was going to be the hardest revenge of all. A year later, I sat across from my ex-wife in a neutral coffee shop and apologized. Not because she asked for it. Not because it would undo what I'd done. But because I needed to speak the truth out loud, that I'd destroyed her not in a moment of rage, but in a calculated campaign of cruelty. That I'd weaponized her vulnerabilities and called it justice. That I'd become someone I didn't recognize and worse, someone I couldn't respect. "I know," she said simply. "I've known for a while. Does it change anything?" I asked. "No," she said. "But it matters that you understand it." We sat in silence for a long time. She was wearing scrubs under her jacket, coming from a shift at the hospital where she'd rebuilt her life one patient at a time. I was wearing the suit of a director who discovered that success meant nothing without integrity. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I told her. "I'm just telling you that I see what I did. And I'm trying to be different." She nodded. "That's enough." It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't redemption. It was just two people who'd destroyed each other trying to understand how they'd gotten there and what they'd become in the process. I'd spent months systematically dismantling her life, her career, her family relationships, her mental health. I'd done it all with the precision of someone executing a perfect plan. And I'd called it justice. But justice, I'd learned too late, requires restraint. It requires the ability to stop before you've destroyed the person entirely. It requires understanding that revenge is a poison you drink expecting someone else to die. My ex-wife had taken the pills and survived. She'd rebuilt. She'd become a nurse, helping people heal instead of hurt. I was still learning how to do the same.